They mocked my dream, the way a bruise mocks the skin, quiet, then brutal, then never quite gone. In the kitchen, at the dinner table, they whispered it like a joke you tell yourself to sleep. A painter, a game developer, a weird little business that would go nowhere but straight into the family annals of embarrassment. They called it ridiculous, and I let it sting, not because I cared what they thought, but because I cared about what I wanted to become. And that night, in the room that smelled of bias and boiling vegetables, I realized I'd chosen between their approval and my own future. When the words landed, I could have stayed and argued, or begged them to see me. I did something louder. I left. I packed a bag that held nothing but a notebook, a battered laptop, and a stubborn dawn in my bones. The car door shut on their laughter, and I drove into the gray breath of morning. Toward a city that spoke in code and color. Toward the blank page that wouldn't judge me for trying. If they wanted a son who fit inside their expectations, they'd have to watch me become someone else entirely. The years bled into long nights and cheap ramen, into an apartment that slept with the sound of a fan, into the relentless rhythm of lines of code and brushstrokes that never dried fast enough. I learned that success isn't a single sunrise, but a string of small, unglamorous mornings when you choose to believe in something bigger than fear. I built a studio out of stubbornness, hired people who believed in the same ridiculous thing, and we argued, and we learned, and we kept pushing. We were told to pivot, to pander, to erase what made us human for the sake of a market. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. We held fast to the spark, an unmarketable spark, a stubborn dream, and we burned through the bullshit until our work began to find a voice that wouldn't quit. The first breakthrough wasn't a capitalization or a headline. It was a moment in a dimly lit room where a prototype didn't crash, didn't glitch, didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. A trailer came together like a confession, and suddenly the internet stopped guessing and started listening. Publishers knocked, not with contempt, but curiosity. The studio grew, then found its rhythm, then found its audience, then found enough breath to stand up straight. We shipped something with honesty on its spine, something that didn't pretend to be elegant if it wasn't. It was rough and true, and players found a way to fall into it anyway. In time, we won small awards, secure funding, and watched the world lighting up with our name on a screen. A kind of vindication that doesn't erase the past, but makes the past make sense. I came home not to claim a throne, but to test the air that had mocked me for years. The town hadn't changed. The same weathered sidewalks, the same little shops that stayed open by stubborn habit, the same hill where we rode bikes and argued about who would be famous first. The house smelled like old photos and something sweeter I couldn't name. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen where the past still lived in the cupboards and the ceiling's tired paint. And I felt the old weight press down. All the small cruelties threaded through memory, ready to snap shut. They were there when I walked in, the same faces that once sharpened their knives on my dreams. The room went quiet, as if the air itself held its breath to listen. On the wall, a television blinked to life with a game trailer we had created, my name rolling across the credits, the studio logo blinking like a stubborn star. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of every hour I'd spent alone, every time a door slammed shut in a city that wouldn't wait for you to decide you mattered. The silence stretched. Then Mother whispered, almost to herself, "Is this really you?" And Father, with a voice that had learned to sound steady even when the ground shifted, asked, "You didn't forget who you were?" I didn't shout. I stood very still and let the room take in the truth I carried in my chest. This is what I became when I refused to be defined by their verdict. I pointed to the screen. This is what I chose to become, not what you hoped I'd be. My tone was clear but not cruel. Hate isn't the currency I've earned this far. I built this from the ground up, with hands that bled for it, with hours when the night didn't end and the coffee didn't help, with a promise I kept to the person who believed in me even when you didn't. The room began to crack, not with rage, but with recognition, the soft, disorienting crack of a family finally seeing a version of me they hadn't allowed themselves to witness. My sister's mouth trembled, and for a breath I saw her envy and pride collide. My brother's eyes, usually quick with jokes at my expense, lowered to the floor as if to study the texture of the wood. And my parents, my mother's eyes shone with unshed tears, my father's jaw loosened. A defeated caution giving way to a reluctant pride. Maybe we were wrong, my mother said, almost surprised by the admission, as if she'd rehearsed a different ending many times and forgotten to read the script aloud. Not you, not this, but look at what you've done with it. She touched the screen, as if the glow could bridge the years of doubt. You scared us, she added, softer now, and you taught us what fear looks like when it wears a mask of love. We stood there in a constellation of awkward apologies and hard truths, and I felt the old ache, the ache of being dismissed, then the sharp relief of being seen. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It was risk, and risk's cousin, responsibility. This confrontation wasn't a final reckoning. It was a doorway. I didn't demand trust. I earned it by showing up with something real, something that could no longer be dismissed as a phase or a whim. I stepped closer to the TV, the glow painting our faces in amber. This is what perseverance sounds like, I said, and I heard the tremor in my own voice, the same tremor I felt the first time I refused to quit. It's not about proving you wrong. It's about proving to myself that I could endure the loneliness, the doubt, the fear, and still choose to begin again every day. The conversation shifted then, from defense to listening. They asked questions I could answer with experiences, not excuses. They marveled at the scales of the studio, the people who slept under desks when deadlines loomed, the way a single character could carry a story and teach a player to see themselves differently. And as they watched, I realized what return means. Not a victory lap, but a durable, unglamorous reclaiming of a path that had almost been erased. When the lights dimmed and the room settled into a quiet that felt like home, not because it was familiar, but because it was honest. I knew this was the moment. The door of that house wouldn't erase me now. It would be the threshold I returned to, not to demand a pardon, but to offer a map. The game on the screen kept playing in the background, a constant reminder of the journey that had brought me back. I stepped toward the door, not away from the room, and the street outside glowed with a quiet, willing dawn. The kind of morning you deserve after years of shadow. I left again, a little lighter, a little heavier with meaning, with the knowledge that I had earned the right to stand in any room and tell the truth of who I am. The world would still test me, but I would no longer test myself against their whisper. I would measure myself against the horizon I had chased and won. And as the door closed behind me, I looked back once, not with revenge, but with a controlled, raw belonging. This was not an ending. It was the moment the story stopped shrinking and finally began to breathe. The road ahead looked wide, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of the journey lift, replaced by a quiet, undeniable certainty. I am home in the life I built, and the family I left is learning to see me as I am, not as they wished me to be.